Today, on Deep Dive with Ian, we're going to take a look at a tale of drug smuggling. We're going to investigate some pretty fishy sea stories, and we're going to take a look at a fantastic wreck dive. That's right, we are heading down to the island of Bonaire to check out the Hilma Hooker. This ship was originally launched in 1951 in the Netherlands and christened the Midland. She ran cargo for 13 years under her original owners before being sold and going through a whole series of name changes over the course of about 20 years. She would become the Mistral, and then the William Express, and then the Anna, and then she ran aground and or sank, depending on the stories that you hear, off the Dominican Republic. She was recovered, sold again, renamed the Doric Express, and ultimately sold one more time to a Colombian owner and named the Hilma Hooker. And this eventually took her in the early summer of 1984 off the coast of Bonaire, where she encountered mechanical difficulties. Not clear if it was engines or rudder, but something went seriously wrong. She was not planning on putting in to the main port of Kralendijk on Bonaire, but towed into Kralendijk, she was unable to go any further under her own power. And that's when things became a bit problematic for the crew. So upon reaching land, the crew were asked to provide their papers and documentation and information on the ship, and they didn't have any of that. And customs officials, of course, got a bit curious, a bit suspicious. They discovered that Interpol actually suspected the Hilma Hooker of drug smuggling, so they went aboard, did their own search, and ended up finding 25,000 pounds of marijuana hidden behind a false bulkhead. Now, this, by the way, is where the first of our rather fishy stories comes in. The dive scene on Bonaire was really led by a guy named Captain Don, and we'll be doing a whole standalone video about Captain Don Stewart. He essentially was the godfather of the entire Bonaire dive scene. The reason that there is so much fantastic diving at Bonaire today is largely thanks to Captain Don. Well, Captain Don also liked to tell stories that, as he put it, were 90% true, but he wouldn't tell you which 90%. And one of the stories that came up was that he and a friend, after the authorities were completely befuddled, unable to find anything hidden aboard Hilma Hooker, he and a friend went down below with their scuba gear and found a panel welded onto the bottom of the ship hiding this compartment of marijuana. And that story is 99% completely false. Anyway, the authorities pull 25,000 pounds of weed off the ship. They do, by the way, burn it on shore, which had to be an entertaining day to be around for. And they then arrested the crew and impounded the ship. At this point, we get to a split in opinion. The local authorities were obligated to keep the ship around because it was evidence in a court case. They had to go try to find the owners of the ship and charge them with this drug smuggling. But if said owners were found not guilty, then, well, the ship would have to be returned to them. The local dive community, on the other hand, saw this as a totally open and shut case of drug smuggling. There was no way anyone was ever going to be dumb enough to show up to take responsibility for this ship in court. And this ship was an ill-maintained, leaky, rusty pile of garbage, essentially. You know, it had mechanical problems that had prevented it from getting any farther than Bonaire. And while it was impounded at the Kralendijk dock, no one's maintaining it. Things are only getting worse. And again, the local dive community, this is the group that is responsible for a significant percentage of Bonaire's economic well-being. There's like diving and dive tourism are the primary things going on Bonaire. Anyway, they want to use this as a dive site because, while Bonaire has beautiful reefs, fantastic shore diving, lots of wildlife, it at this point did not have any significant or viable diveable shipwreck. And the dive guys on Bonaire saw this as an absolute gift from the heavens of what a fantastic opportunity. We'll take this freighter and we'll go, we can figure out exactly where to sink it, and we'll have a beautiful, perfect ship that we can dive on. It'll be great. But legally, they can't do that until after a court case, and the court case doesn't look like it's going to be happening. Well, in the middle of this sort of stalemate back and forth, the ship's not being maintained. It's getting to be in worse and worse condition. It's relying on pumps to keep its bilges clear of water. And the authorities do recognize that if this thing just like keels over and sinks in Kralendijk Harbor, it would be a gigantic pain. It would be a hazard to navigation. It'd be a huge logistical problem to get rid of it. So they agree to find a site where they can put it in like long-term anchorage, pending the outcome of its court case. And they consult with the dive community on where best to put this thing so that if it should happen to accidentally sink, it wouldn't be a navigation hazard, it wouldn't damage the reef, and perhaps it would actually be in a good place for divers. So they move it about halfway down the island, so halfway between the southern end of the island and the city, the port of Kralendijk, to a place called Angel City, so named for its angelfish population, and put it at anchor there. And it rolls over and sinks not 5 days later, September 12th, 1984, at 9:08 in the morning. The list that it has begun to take on gets more severe. It lists to the point that water starts coming in the lower portholes, and it rolls over and sinks in just a couple of minutes. No fanfare, no announcement. It wasn't supposed to happen, but this is the second of our fishy tales. The popular story amongst a lot of the dive guides who want it to sound really cool on Bonaire is that in the middle of the night, a bunch of possibly inebriated dive guides, probably under the direction of Captain Don, went out to the boat, stole it, piloted it out to where it is now, and then deliberately sank it. The reality, well, they didn't do that. It was moved cooperatively with the government. However, it's entirely possible that there are some divers who are responsible perhaps for the pumps on board failing, or otherwise hastening its demise once it just happened to be anchored over an absolutely perfect dive location. So, September 12, 1984, the ship goes down, and it lands on the sandy bottom right in between a double reef system. The sand here is at 100 feet depth, that's 30 meters. The top of the hull, it ends up lying on its starboard side. The top of the hull is at 60 feet depth. The propeller is at 65 feet, that's about 20 meters. It is in absolutely perfect recreational limits for diving. It happens to be like 20 feet off of a beautiful reef, but where it actually hits is plain, untarnished, sandy bottom. It damages nothing. It is readily accessible from shore. It's maybe a 50-meter, maybe 100-meter swim out from shore. It's accessible by boat. It is in the perfect location. Now, and that's where the Hilma Hooker rests today. Now, what makes this boat such a great dive today is that it kind of offers something for divers of every skill level. If you've never done a wreck dive, if you're not certified for deep diving, if this is the very first time you've gone down onto any sort of major shipwreck, well, the top of the hull's at 60 feet. You can go down to 60 feet. You can look around. The propellers are really cool. You're going to mostly see the flat side of the hull, but it's a good introduction, a very easy, low effort, low stress introduction to a wreck dive. If you're capable of going deeper, if you don't mind hitting 100 feet, well, 100 feet's the bottom. You can go all the way down to the bottom. You can take a look at the masts that lie basically flat down on the sand. You can look at the whole superstructure on the port side that has now rolled over. If you are a certified wreck diver and you are comfortable penetrating into the wreck, well, there's all sorts of stuff in there. In fact, really the one downside of the Hilma Hooker as a wreck dive is that it was not prepared for diving in the way many intentionally sunk artificial reef wrecks. Before they're sunk, crews will go through and essentially clean up the inside of the ship. They'll get rid of doors, they'll get rid of potential snagging hazards, all the little stuff, just to make it a nice, open, safe, easy thing to dive through. Nobody did that on Hilma Hooker. So, for example, the engine room is incredibly hazardous. It's totally dark, and it's full of all sorts of crap lying around and hanging from the walls / ceiling / floor. Like, you don't want to go in the engine room unless you're a really experienced diver and you know exactly what you're getting into. There are doors inside, there's debris inside. You have to be careful of it. if you are a certified wreck diver and you want to penetrate it, be aware that it's not a clean prepared wreck. But aside from that, what you have here is a cool looking ship. Yeah, it's not an aircraft carrier. It's not, a guided missile tracking ship with giant radar dishes that are cool to look at. It's just a freighter. It's a very benign, plain Jane sort of cargo ship. But it's in beautiful water. It is directly adjacent to a beautiful reef that you can dive on. You can see on the same dive. It's accessible either by car from the shore, just go to the yellow rock marked Hilma Hooker, or by boat from a dive shop. There are buoys on the bow and the stern of the ship that boats can tie off to. We, in fact, have dove this site twice. Once we did it from shore, and once we did it from a boat. If you're doing it from shore, you can go down to 60, 70, 80, or 100 feet, do your dive on the ship, and then come back up onto the much shallower reef as you get back in towards shore, and have a nice extension to your dive time there, where your deco limit doesn't really matter, because you can be at 30, 20, 30, 35 feet and have an extended dive over a reef after seeing the ship. So if you are on Bonaire, absolutely recommend diving the Hilma Hooker. It can be a relatively crowded dive because it is the one viable, really good wreck that you can dive recreationally on Bonaire. So a lot of boats, a lot of shore divers will go out to it. And if you get there early in the morning, it's probably your best bet for having it all to yourself. And by the way, you will not have it all to yourself because all of the reef wildlife is out there. And when we've dove this site both times, we saw a whole bunch of big 4 and 5 foot tarpon that kind of hung around and gave us the side eye the entire time. So there are eels on the bottom. You'll sometimes see rays. You'll sometimes see barracuda. We saw tarpon. And of course, all of the other reef fish, all the corals growing on the wreckage of the Hilma Hooker.